All right, so is this on right now? You can hear me? Okay, good, good. So I'm going to talk about the iPython notebook and some development lessons that I've learned while using it. So kind of the obligatory show of hands, see how many people have heard of the notebook? Cool. And how many people have actually used it, played around with it? Cool. All right. So this will be fun. So this is going to be a little bit different. A lot of notebook talks. There's a lot of notebook talks, tutorials, and introductions to it out there, and they show a lot of the really cool stuff. They do it really well, and I have links to the Python tutorial that I attended this last year at PyCon, and a few other notebook tutorials in there, in addition to a list of other tutorials using the notebook itself. So I'm not going to concentrate on that for this talk. So that means we're not going to dive into directly some of the things like the rich display system. So it can show right in line in the notebook equations, images, sounds, movies, HTML, everything that you want to do. And all these things can be either generated beforehand and included in the notebook, or generated programmatically and shown in the notebook as a result. As well, we're not going to talk about its architecture. We'll just have a glancing blow at it near the end, or its debugging capabilities, its parallel computing capabilities, how to share stuff over a network, how to use their built-in notebook, or the notebook viewer service that they offer. We're not going to touch any of that. What we are going to do is kind of take a walk through some of the history with it. So what I found, I first heard about the iPython notebook at PyCon 2012, and I was going to Wes McKinney's talk on his pandas data library. And I work in the medical research area, and so I was there. Pandas is a nice library for actually cutting through data and making sense of it. It came out of, I believe, his work in his financial work when he was in New York. And it's a really interesting library. And during the middle of his talk, though, he goes from his slide deck into what I found out was the iPython notebook. And he completely sliced and diced data, showed, grabbed stock data for this time, cut it down a certain time series, filled in missing data points in there automatically, and was able to display results and then iterate on that very quickly. So myself and a lot of other people actually left that talk more talking about the notebook than pandas. The notebook was what he was doing was just amazing. I hadn't seen something happen like this in the web browser in a while. So I went home from PyCon and tried to get everything installed on my own machine, and failed miserably. Some of the visualization libraries had massive dependencies. You had to compile a bunch of stuff that depended on other things that you might have had to homebrew to install. And there's a whole bunch of things blocking this. So I kind of just left that for a bit. There were options out there. I could have installed the Anaconda Python distribution or the Nthought Python distribution, but I needed my machine to be kind of clean so that I could have repeatable builds on it that I could deploy to other servers. I didn't know how Anaconda or Nthought would work that, and I didn't have time to mess around with it. So throughout that year, I kept on hearing about the notebook, reading more and more articles. Like a lot of people left PyCon and started playing with the notebook there. So you got to see some of the cool stuff that started happening. And then PyCon 2013 was announced, and they had an iPython notebook tutorial there. So I convinced work to pay for it, and that gave me time to actually mess around and get a build going, figure out all the dependencies. It still took quite a while. So I showed up at the tutorial, and it's really good. This is the link that I have at the end. They have the whole video, which is about 2.5 hours, and a GitHub repo of all their notebooks that were used. And at break time, the guy beside me, he worked for a school district in the area, and he was telling me how he had taken the course, the same tutorial the year before, and he'd gone to work back at the school district. He was just blowing everyone away, showing them how they could get access to their data. They're a relatively large organization with relatively standardized procedures. You write this data request form, and then a few months later, you might get a view of your data. And he was doing that within days or hours for these people, just giving them feedback on what they were able to measure. But he said something else. He said, so it's great for that. It's a great career advancer in that way. But for dealing with libraries that aren't so well documented, it's been a lifesaver. And it's like I've been able to, get things that have zero documentation to them and figure out how they worked right within the notebook and not have to deal with all the frustrating things of going to forums or finding the non-existent documentation and all that. So I come back from PyCon that year, and two things changed. I noticed that like my iPython notebook my notebook virtual environment was kind of getting out of date, but Wheels came out, or Wheels were really pushed and announced just before PyCon, and setup tools and distribute merged together. So this gave me, I was able to spend a Saturday morning kind of getting a whole wheelhouse set up on my local machine, and I could trust it now that I had these nicer, more advanced distribution and build tools. I could trust it that I could create a iPython virtual environment within seconds instead of 30 minutes and having 10,000 compiler errors show up on my screen as it built it. So it gave me real confidence I could reproduce the setup that I used within the notebook. At this point, I had something for work. I had to make a small data extraction project. And I was playing around with the server. I was writing a little server class for it and getting caught on stuff. Because I was trying to learn three things at once. I needed to learn how to use the request library specifically. I needed to learn HTTP because I've been a backend developer my entire career. And I need to learn all the idiosyncrasies of how the server operated. And there were tons of weird ways that this operated. So trying to keep all these balls in the air at once was really difficult and frustrating. And I remember what the guy said, the tutorial said beside me, how he mentioned how it was good for getting into libraries that were poorly documented and for getting some immediate feedback. And I also remember that they had very strong introspection that was built into the notebook, so you could dive into the code and figure out how stuff was going. So I decided to see if I could build this small portion of my app in the notebook first and then bring it back out. And it was absolutely amazing. The tool, where before I was swapping between the terminal and Sublime Text and my file browser, I no longer had to do all that. Everything was right there. And the tool just kind of got out of the way and let me deal with just the problem at hand. So what I want to do is take a look at some of the features of the notebook that made this work so well for me. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick look at the notebook here. All these slides are also online, and they link to, all these links are live, and they're hosted on, you can see all these notebooks live on the NV Viewer website. If you click this link, it'll take you right to it. Slides are already up on the NVPy site. So this here is called this is your first view of the iPython notebook. It came out of the... Yeah.
What you're trying to do is you're trying to pull the data from the server, massage it in some way, right?
Yes.
So you had to make HTTP requests to it?
Yes.
So you had to go between Sublime and the terminal to test things and work with the library?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And this is alternative?
And this is an alternative to that development process. Yeah, I had a small component of what I was building, and I then put it, it was a relatively well abstracted and isolated component. It's like this is the thing that manages my server session, and that I can hand different server objects, server connection objects to, and it will connect that and ask for arbitrary resources on those servers. So I knew how I wanted this to look, which was a nice help to it. Yeah. So the iPython notebook came out of the scientific community, and this is your notebook dashboard. You think of it as kind of like a lab book. So you have very distinct pieces of work that you may be working on. They're very isolated from each other. So what you would do is just load up your notebook. This is my notebook talk, and this is how it looks. So you've got your regular header stuff and toolbar. I'm just going to hide these things right now. And let's take a look at what's so special about this. So one of the things that was really important was the notebook is based around the concept of cells. So when you have a regular Python REPL, that's more based on the concept of lines. You hand it a line, the REPL interprets it, and puts you to the next step. Whereas in here, it's a mixture of different types of cells. So you can have header cells, which show up as like the HTTP, different HTTP headers, so H1 through 6. You can also have markdown cells, where you can write in Markdown on there and have it rendered directly in the notebook. Same with raw text cells, and most importantly, code cells. So big thing to remember is cells are the unit of currency within the notebook. They are the unit of execution interpretation. As well, I mentioned before that I had to keep popping between my file browser, my terminal, my notebook. In this, you never have to leave the notebook. All your input and all your output can be displayed directly in the notebook. It can be also written to file and stuff, but it's very, very useful for prototyping and building when you can go here and say print hello, and just like in the REPL, you would get hello printed back out. And same with this, if you put in a string of hello, as in the REPL, you just got an object back that was hello. As well, you can also see the sequential ordering of inputs that happen here. So we start off with the comment was, input number 1 to the REPL that's actually interpreting this, and input number 3 was the one for hello here. As well, what's really nice is tab completion right in the notebook. So say we are doing an import, and we say import CO, we hit tab, you immediately get the popover of all the things that are completed that start with CO. And you can start, as you type, it automatically tapers down that popover list for you. And you can hit, enter, it'll complete it out, and you can execute that cell. And by the way, I'm executing these cells by pressing Shift-Enter to execute, to send it off to the REPL. As well, when you have, say you have collections already imported into your namespace here, you can do collections.c, and you can hit tab again, and pull through down to the one that you actually want to complete it with. So that's very important. I really like tab completion. It's one of those things, it's one of the reasons that I use like the iPython interpreter when I just need to get a very quick REPL up. It's just quick access, saves me from typing and carpal tunnel syndrome. As well, what was really nice is I didn't have to give up any of the syntax highlighting that I normally had within Sublime when I went over to the notebook here. It did everything live as I typed it. So you can have all of your variables, your literals, multi-line strings, comments, operators, all of those are showing up very clearly here, so you aren't having a subpar experience as to what you had before. This was one of the really big things. Is they really put a lot of work into their help system. So say we take a look at this here, we can, if I do collections.counter and I do an open brace and wait a second, it will give me a popover showing the doc string that collections.counter has associated with it. I can also bring it up immediately by just pressing tab, and if I press tab again, it will expand into a little scrollable popover list. Now, that's really useful and nice, but when you start typing here, the popover goes away. So what they've also done is you can do collections.counter ? And if you execute the cell there, it has a little pop under here that goes to the collections module, looks for the counter doc string, and brings it up here. And you can pop that out to a new window. You can re-minimize it, close it, and you'll notice as well that that was just the doc string for the counter module. If we do double ? This is for when you don't have as many, say something might not have a doc string. What it does is actually goes there and tries to find you the source code for the actual module that that name is referring to. So you can see that this is where this was the doc string that I brought up before, but it's just a doc string inside of the code now, and you actually have access to all of the code. So if there's no documentation in some libraries, you can actually start to try and figure stuff out. As well, that's right here, the collections.counter, that only pulled up the code necessary for defining the collections.counter class. Whereas if you do just the if you do the collections one and execute it, it actually pulls up the entire collections module. So it's very smart about taking the code snippets that it needs to do to show you the code. So, as well, what was nice is the multi-line cells. So the cells, you could put in entire blocks of code into there, and you could put entire little execution pieces in there. Say I have this, I'm assigning this going to use a helper function class, and it will run out and send it to the REPL and bring it right back. That ties into this next one, which is you're always able to see the code you're working with. This is just a quick, 3-class type thing. We have a server session, and it also depends on a login object and a server object. We can always see exactly, if I define these above, am I getting some feedback? There we go. Turn down the volume. There we go. Is that better? Okay. So if we get, so we have a server session object that depends on a login and a server. Now, if I don't know exactly how I'm going to construct these, or compose these objects together, I don't have to, all I have to do is look back up a little bit. I don't have to go search out the other file. I don't have to do any of that stuff. As well, if I need to know how to call it, it's all sitting right here as well. And what's really nice is once the code is stabilized, I'm really getting a lot of feedback now. Okay. Is that okay? One pointed away.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. There we go. Okay. Okay. So as well, once a piece of code is stable, I can move it out to its own separate little module. The Python interpreter will work in the exact same way. It will go, I can say import my module, and I can have direct access to that. And that's really useful for when I have a good external interface and a good other lower level interface, but I don't know how the internals are going to be composed and how they're going to all work together. So once something gets stable, I can move it out. If it ever destabilizes, I can move it right back into here and start experimenting with it again. Related to that is you also get to see the data. So humans are really bad at parsing long, arbitrary, nested dictionary strings, JSON strings. And computers are really good at that. So one thing they wanted to make very easy is viewing this data. Now this is just a quick dictionary comprehension, but I had to deal with a bunch of other cookies coming back and how that's represented in Python code. Now as soon as it starts to get longer than one line, it automatically does nice, pretty printing and wrapping of your data. So you always had access to that as you're going through and experimenting. As well, you can always go through and see the error that came out. So if I try to instantiate a server session object again, and in this instance I'm going to mess up the login and server order, when I run through, I get a nice Python traceback, and actually I'm going to zoom down one level because it's wrapping the attribute error. But a nice color-coded traceback that comes through. From that point, you can actually go into a full-on debug session if you want. You can access, PDB, do a post-mortem on the code, and see how everything was operating. Really, really powerful. As well, it gave me a place to write down notes in Markdown format. So if I tried something, I could go here and I would have a cell and I'd say, so I tried this and it failed for this reason. I tried this, but here are these caveats here. And here, right below it or right above it, very proximal to it, is the code that actually did that. So my understanding and my work are right there, just like in a real scientific notebook. You do some tests, get some data plots coming out, and it's all right there. And also has a rich display. Like I popped in this just graphic that I had taken a picture of earlier. What was also kind of cool is you can do multiple languages with it. So if I ever needed to move some files around and I didn't want to go to shell out to anything, I could do this. This is called a cell magic. So it means anything that starts with a %%, and there are a few of those that are predefined. It will, if that heads the cell, everything below it will be interpreted using that magic. So everything in the cell is interpreted as a bash script. So I can run through and print out all the items and stick it in this directory. I can remove items in this directory. And it's also smart so that you can't really walk above this directory and accidentally nuke your entire directory tree.
I'm having a hard time seeing, since this is a browser, where's this directory and how are you managing your place in the file system?
Cool, I can show you that in a sec. Yeah. As well, what you can do is these are little line magics here. So anything that's preceded with an exclamation point, the rest of that line will be interpreted as a shell script and returned back into a Python variable. So if I list everything in grep for all my .ipynb files, then I get back all of the notebook files that are sitting in that directory, and also tell me which this is the current directory that I'm operating, and we'll take a look at that in a little bit. What's also interesting is you can point to other backends. So if you're a Ruby developer, you can actually do some of your development within the iPython notebook. So this is, I don't really know much Ruby. This is something I just grabbed off of, I think, one of the tutorials online. But you can run through, runs it in Ruby, comes back. This is a bit to do with the 0MQ architecture of it. They've basically taken your REPL and moved the execution portion just out into its own interpreter. And this part accepts all your input and receives all your output. And so what they did is write a special, they wrote a special Ruby connector and a special like Julia connector and a Bash and Perl connector, so that you can see, so that you can talk to all these different ones and then get your output back into a notebook. So those are some of the features that really helped out with the notebook here. Oh no. Let's open this back up. There we go. Okay, so let's take a look, like why, so these are some very nice features, but is there a larger view that we can take of this, of why this actually worked so well? Looking at it, there's a good talk by Matt Davis. He teaches with software carpentry, and he talked about the iPython notebook being a way to reduce the cognitive load of work. So whenever you're learning something, you have three types of cognitive load that you hit. There's intrinsic, germane, and extrinsic load. Now your intrinsic is, sometimes the subject is just hard. And he likens this to quantum mechanics. Sometimes learning quantum mechanics is just hard. And your germane load comes from trying to reconcile what you're learning about quantum mechanics and fitting that into your knowledge of physics already. And how does that fit in with the web of ideas and affect other ideas in there? And your extraneous load is like, you're an English speaking person and you know a bit of German and you're trying to learn quantum mechanics in German. So you're already doing this extra translation that doesn't need to happen. And we already know there's ample psychological evidence showing that we only have so much load that we can work under before we just kind of get sloppy in it and cut corners. So the iPython notebook really helped with that. If I ever needed to redefine something, do anything with it, everything was right there. I never even had to like look up. I just had to scroll a half page up and I could see what I was working on in the process. As well, what was very nice is I luckily, and this is just more of a fluke or a good chance happening. I had very clear code interfaces. I knew what I wanted my server session to look like. I knew how I wanted to interact with pulling that data out. I said, you know, this is how I say I want this resource. I don't care what server it's going to. That's handled somewhere else, and return me this data. And I also had very good lower level interfaces. And so all the stuff in between could be changing as stuff, as I understood the problem better. So as I connected to the server, you know, if it was a regular HTTP like REST resource, I could request anything. I could sign in, request anything, go. This one, if I didn't request a very specific resource first, and then another in a certain order, the server would not let me sign in. So being able to go and change with all those things and have the code roll as I did this was very important. As well, I had very easy access to the different levels of abstraction that I needed. So there's this, I don't know where this quote comes from, I've seen it on the internet a few times, but basically it says, you know, whatever you're working with, try to understand something below it because something's going to break and it's going to make your life a lot easier if you can drop down. But kind of a corollary to this is have very easy access to the layer of abstraction right below where you're working. So if something does go wrong, you can get into there. You can have the hooks and ports to get into there without having to do backbends. Also very important was very fast iteration. Uncle Bob Martin, he's a well-known guy who does talks and books and teaching seminars about coding practices and how to do better coding. And he wrote this about actually the lifelike photo of Morgan Freeman that was recently sketched. And he showed how this tool, you know, just of him being able to touch and zoom in and add all the brush strokes very easily and naturally lets him produce this stunningly realistic photo. And the same type of thing applies to our code. And I was able to do that continuously within the iPython notebook. As well, this is almost one of the constraints of working in the notebook is I only have so much vertical room. I don't have multiple tabs open. I don't have everything spread out over, you know, my like multiple monitors and stuff. So in addition to taking what we know from test-driven development and low-factored programs, this limitation forced me to write smaller functions and things that were very comprehensible right away, because otherwise I'd be scrolling up, you know, through pages and pages of notes, and everyone knows the horror of opening a file and realizing there's 5,000 lines of Python code sitting in a file. As well, the fast iteration of this, I could have a class defined in one cell and immediately go back and refactor that. Re-execute is automatically redefined and I can go and start working on it. So very, very fast iteration. As a nice bonus, when I finished, the top to bottom in the notebook, the code was there, the final working code. I could just execute it right from top to bottom, know it was working as it was, and then bring it back out to a module. So remember, reduce cognitive load, clear code interfaces, easy access to all your levels of abstraction that you need, access to fast iteration, and small pieces of well-factored code made this a really powerful tool to use. So thank you, and I'll take any questions. Yes. So the notebook directory, right?
Well, actually, I've got one.
Okay, sure.
What would this not fit into? Like, what type of use could you see not making sense? Are you using it? Have you started using it? Is there?
Yeah. I've been using it quite a bit. I haven't been now the one what most people have been using it for that I've seen. They've been more around visualization of data, and even though I work in that field, I haven't had to do as much visualization recently. This would have been a problem if I had a lot of pre-existing code that was, you know, like the 5,000 line Python file. If I put that into here, I would have had a lot of problems working with that. I would have had to put down some work to kind of break it up before I started working that way.
But that's as if you're working on the specific file, not if you're just using it as a module.
That's right.
You just import it.
Yeah, if I just import it, it's sitting there. But I have to go and if I was trying to refactor that entire module in one go, that would probably be a little bit of a problem. Just because I'd have to pre-break everything up into its cells, and the cells could take up, like, you know, as soon as you have a cell starting to scroll off the screen, every time you execute it, you're back into scrolling mode. So you want small steps.
Have you seen anything that helps with something like having an SSH session where you can start using iPython into your server?
As in which way?
Well, instead of having to SSH into your server and then running Python and doing your experiments, because sometimes
So that's kind of the parallel computing aspect of it. You can actually set up, if you can define, so you can either set up your notebook server, doesn't have to run on your local machine. So if you take a look here, this is actually my notebook server that's running here. Basically what you're doing is you can set this server running up somewhere else. And in fact, by default it's set to only accept connections on localhost. You can change that so that it's only accepting connections from certain IPs or certain areas. And you can have that running on a big cluster if you want, and have your actual GUI that's running being in your own local web browser. So I've set up something with work where I have a notebook running on a Windows server. I connect up my VPN, and then I'm able to get into that notebook through my own browser on my Mac here. And everything that executes happens on that server there. So I can hit it, I can walk away, and then when I come back, the results of the execution can be sitting in the notebook waiting there for me. So.
What about virtual end? Sorry.
Yep.
Virtual end, like how does it work with it?
Yep. I have, this is actually running in a virtual end right now. Let's see here. Yeah, everything's working with the virtual end. So what I can do is set, this virtual end is running on Python 3.3. I have some virtual ends that are running on Python 2.7 for some legacy code for work. Whatever's in there runs just the same. In fact, right here, there we go. To do an install of these, it's become a lot easier. If you just do a pip install use wheel, you'll need iPython, PyZMQ for the 0 and Q connection, Gingit2 and Tornado, and then you just say iPython space notebook, everything runs. And its default configured so that when you run the notebook, it'll open up the address of the notebook in your web browser. So in this case, it's localhost. The default one is 8888. You can run multiple notebook servers in multiple different directories. So you can, and it will detect that there's a notebook server all running on 8888, and it'll go to 8889 or 889, and so on and so on. Yeah.
You actually stole my question. I was going to ask about this one.
Yep, completely isolated and repeatable.
So actually, just a quick question. Are you installing iPython into the virtual environment?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, iPython goes into the virtual environments. So so this would be the iPython 2.7 virtual end. And I installed a whole bunch more things into this one. I think I had SQL Alchemy and Nose and other things, but this is all completely isolated. Yeah.
Used Mathematica before?
I have, yeah. This is, I haven't used it in a while, but this felt like using both MATLAB and Mathematica, kind of having the same immediate access to some of that data, but with modern Python tools.
Are you able to do things like inline 3D visualizations?
Yep.
Spin things around?
Yep. You can, let's see here. Go back to the notebook server. Yeah, so in there, they have, these are some of the rich visualization tools that they're talking about before. So you can pull in any of the, these are all cleared out. Let's go to this. So as well, what's really nice, they maintain an online notebook viewer. So if you publish any notebook up to the web, you can go to the notebook viewer, give it the URL, and it will go and display it for you in a static way. So any content that's already been rendered in there, any images, diagrams are already there. And they maintain a gallery of interesting notebooks that people have put together. So like, let's see here. This one I know I sent to a friend. But they'll import all their images right in there. These will be generated by code. Let's see here, I know they had some Atom. So this would be they actually calculated this image out, and as the result of it, it's stored within the notebook here.
Can you have like interaction widgets though? So that was a 3D visualization spinning around.
anything you can do in HTML, you can do in this. Yeah. Yeah. So you should be able to, I believe.
Have you played with the JavaScript magic or whatever it's called?
I haven't as much, but they have a full JavaScript support in there too. So they let's see here. So I wonder if it's in the rich display system. Yeah, so you can also access any HTML stuff to display it as or rendered right below this, and any JavaScript as well. You can do that as well right in the notebook, and that's just thanks to the big great browser support of JavaScript now. Yeah. So there are more resources. If you all the resources I mentioned here are located on this last page here. So the full video tutorial. The full teaching with the iPython notebook that Matt Davis talked about at Python this last year, notebook viewers and installation and pre-built installation or Python installation packages. So yeah, no more questions.